Hi, and welcome back to the History Hut. We've wrap up our discussion on Islam here. I'm Jim, this is Dr. K, and we'll be talking about the two M's, medicine and math. And you've told me before that Islam led the West in the development of things like hospitals, medical texts. Could you give me some examples of that?
Absolutely. So major advances in medicine, and probably one of the most important and interesting things is that they established hospitals probably before, definitely before the West, in places like Damascus and Baghdad and Cairo. And they actually, the Islamic doctors developed the practice of quarantining people, so if they had different sicknesses, you would keep them in different parts, which makes sense now.
Does.
They made use of the great libraries and the translated works of the Nestorian Christians, and of course they had all of their scholars in Baghdad in a it's technically called the House of Wisdom, so all these scholars all kind of working together. Probably two of the key people that we would know about are, again, al-Razi, our boy with the secrets, and Ibn Sina. And Ibn Sina is called Avicenna in the West. So al-Razi wrote Continens, that's the name of his book, and the treatise on smallpox and measles. So again, we talked about this when we were talking about China. 10th century, read in Europe until about the 17th century, so long shelf life. And Ibn Sina's works are the Canon of Medicine and his encyclopedic book of healing, translated into Latin and used in the West until the 17th century as well. And they produce all sorts of books on disease, symptoms, treatments, everything from headaches to really serious diseases. And they produced anatomical texts as well. Now, the anatomical texts are no great shakes. They're probably as bad as the Western anatomical texts, and that's because of this unease with cutting open dead bodies. It's just kind of not allowed, and so you're really kind of guessing a lot of the time. So they're not all that good. But the anatomical texts still stand until Vesalius in the West produces his very lifelike, because he was actually using dead bodies, the fabric of the human anatomy in the 1600s. Well-off men would, as part of their charitable works, part of their Islamic faith, would maybe donate a hospital to an area, maybe small hospitals in towns that had, or even in cities that would maybe have about 20 doctors. And they followed a lot of the accepted knowledge of the time, the classical world. People like Galen, who believed in the four humours, and I know that you've heard of these, if only from Blackadder. There's a funny Blackadder about that. Black bile, yellow bile, blood and phlegm, and when any of these were out of sync, or they were thought to be out of balance, you got ill. So if they thought you needed to be bled, they would bleed you. If they thought you needed to be purged, they would make you throw up. So they did accept quite a lot of the basic medicines of the old classical world, but they certainly go a long way beyond that. Now, in maths, there's been a lot of new work recently showing the incredible debt that we owe to Islamic maths, and I would just add that we owe that same debt to Hindu mathematics as well, to Indian mathematics as well. From about 800 AD in Baghdad, in the House of Wisdom, you have Islamic scholars influenced by Hindu mathematics, and it was Brahmanic mathematics. They developed the decimal system that we use, and the concept of zero, using zero as an actual number, not just as a placeholder. And so you have...
Or as a mark on an exam.
Or as a mark on an exam. That's so true. The other one I like is F, but that's from the alphabet.
Right.
So
different
that's Greek.
set of
that's
characters.
From the Greek. Yeah. So you have this House of Wisdom in Baghdad set up for research, and translations from the Greek were done there by mathematical and scientific guys, not just by kind of people that were translators and good at language, but people that were actually kind of into that particular discipline. And so it's people in the House of Wisdom that are working on this, and the translators made a huge amount of money. I heard recently that there were about 70 translators working in Baghdad, and they made the equivalent of $24,000 a month for the translation. So I
Wow.
mean, that shows the importance that this had.
Yeah.
So under al-khwarizmi, he was working on algebra, and this is seen as a revolutionary move away from the Greeks and geometry. And I'll just say this, but I don't really understand algebra or geometry. That his work was seen as a unifying theory that let all rational and irrational numbers and geometric magnitudes be treated as algebraic objects. I think I saw that as a question on an exam once that I flunked in math. I like algebra. I'm not keen on geometry at all. I quite like algebra though. So you get a whole new path of development for mathematics, and 40 years after al-Khwarizmi's work starts, they're still expressing the power of X in words. So the use of the symbol comes a bit later on, and then we have our old friend Omar Khayyam, the poet, but also court mathematician and the man who worked on the Jalali, the calendar, and he classified cubic equations with geometric solutions using intersecting conic sections. Do you even understand that? I don't.
Sure,
I'm sure
I
anybody
do.
that loves maths would be like, oh, was that him? That's so cool.
It's
I
my
love
favorite
that.
thing.
So it's about 100 years after that, people were using Khayyam's application of algebra to geometry. And the work that he did is later on called Pascal's triangle in the West. So a lot of this stuff has already been done. There are lots of other examples that anybody who's interested in maths would probably just eat up. Trig functions, which are used in astronomy and mathematical astronomy, number theory, they're working on number theory, timekeeping, methods of calculation using the Indian numbering system, and using the dust board, the equivalent of the blackboard and chalk. Yes, so every piece counts. Everything's important. You know, there's no point learning all that math if you've no place to write it down and rub
That's a
it
really
out.
good point,
right?
yeah.
So the development of decimal fractions, algorithms to calculate to the nth root, and all that stuff. This is all coming out of the Islamic world fairly, before the turn of the last millennium. So lots and lots of work in medicine and in maths as well.
And how long does this all continue?
Well, some of it begins to be shut down. Of course, the actual work that's produced is with us the entire time, but some of it begins to shut down in the 10th century with the development of one of the four Sunni theological traditions, the Ashari School. That's A-S-H-A-R-I. And this is founded by Abu al-Hasan al-Ashari, 873 to about 935, and he stressed divine revelation over human reason. And so he said that, God's commands as revealed in the Quran and the Sunnah are the only sources of morals and ethics, and that there's no point in trying to understand nature because God created it and only God can understand it. So why are you going out and trying to do all this other stuff? Because that's not what it's all about.
It's just showing off, really.
Yeah,
is what it is.
it's like it's beyond the capacity of humans to understand any of this. All truth comes from revelation. You can't deduce it. You can't look at things and say, oh yeah, this happened, because of that and the other. So for instance, there's an example I have by Al-Ghazali. If cotton is placed in fire, the cotton is burned by God, not by the fire. So here you've got other scholars trying to work out what happens when fire burns, and then this Ashari school kind of comes along and says, hey, that's not what it's all about. Cotton burns because God's decided that the cotton's going to burn. This is called occasionalism. And so sometimes the Ashari school is kind of blamed for putting an end to this incredible period of innovation, but of course there are other things, I suppose, going on as well. So occasionalism is this theory of causation that says that created substances can't cause things. All events are caused by God. All that we see is the illusion of things changing. So for someone like Jabir, there's no point then in trying to work out what's happening in a chemical reaction. It just happens because it's supposed to happen. It's got nothing to do with it. So God creates the thing and then God causes the thing or Allah causes the thing to happen. So in the end, the written work does remain, and it's still influential. And as I said early on, although Western scholars for a very long time, until the modern period, didn't accept that Islamic scholars had done anything but collect knowledge and refused to admit that they'd produced anything themselves, it's quite clear now that they did create, in fact, an incredible new synthesis of knowledge. But certainly this innovative work starts to slow down, and the Ashari school is is probably credited with that. But at the same time, you have to look at the time period and look at what's happening, because you've got the Crusades just on the horizon, so the first attacks on Islamic territory, and there's all sorts of other things going on too, and there's internal problems of corruption in the Abbasid dynasty. So there are other contextual things as well, but the Ashari School certainly seems to have an impact. But when you look back on it as this body of things that people were interested in, it's absolutely amazing. So it certainly rivals Chinese knowledge and the kind of production of information there. And of course, for a long time, because each side, the Christians and the Muslims, saw each other as infidels. They weren't willing to use the information. Christians weren't willing to use the information coming out of the Islamic world. When it did come out in a big rush after the fall of Constantinople, you get the beginnings of the scientific revolution. So some people have linked those two things together as well. So I bet you want to go and do some traveling now and see some of these places and some of these. Some of these astronomical observatories are still there, and you can see them working. So it's really quite amazing. Interesting. Yeah.
Well, that wraps up our discussion on Islam. Join us next time in the History Hut when we tackle India.
Yes, very interesting. Okay, bye.